All right, so this is COMP1050 Animation 2D Tools, Week 1, Lesson 1, Part 2. And we kind of briefly did a demo in the last movie about, was it Part 3? Probably Part 3, right? About how Flash worked and everything else. We kind of talked about stuff, the stage, the timeline, and so on. So we're going to kind of, click through here really quickly. One of the things is, if you go onto Blackboard, I've put in a bunch of example files for you. You can actually, you can download and include in your movies, right? Like for example, here, what I'm saying is go to the archive, the code archive folder, and that's the actual code archive folder that I've saved for you and put up on Blackboard. Okay. So here, what they're doing is the book has us take care of the same stuff we were doing here. We'll open up an ActionScript 3. We haven't actually done an ActionScript 3, any kind of coding at all. But we're opening up this FLA file. The FLA file is your Flash file. That's what it is, right? And again, we kind of started off. You can modify the width and height of the screen by 800 and 600. And I've left my frame rate at 24 frames per second, but you can change that frame rate to whatever you want. Typically, for games, we don't do anything lower than 30. And we want to try, when we have more acceleration, to go higher nowadays. But 30 is a good starting point for games. So here it says, we got this working copy of the FLA. If I follow the instructions here just for 1 second, so again, just to go back really quickly, I'm going to create a new Flash document. So Flash ActionScript 3, right? Or I can open up the document that I have. Let's say I create a new document. I can always open up in my code archive anything I want. Like for example, if I open up the actual document itself, like this end FLA, obviously for part 1, is the way it's going to look when we're done. So here it is. And if you notice, I've got 2 documents open. I've got this untitled document and this end FLA document. And if I click Command or Control Enter or Return, then you have this Coney Island little ad that's animated, right? And all it does is we're just adding new pictures according to the timeline. So let's take a look at that. We kind of did like a little bit of timeline stuff. If you noticed, there's different layers here on the timeline in this document. And as I scrub over, once I hit a different position on the timeline, I continue to add more and more different pictures or text as we continue, right? The other thing to note is in the code archive of Lesson 1, I also have, when I hit Control or Command Enter, I get a bunch of extra files. I don't just get the Swift file, right, as an example. I also can get an HTML file. And it really depends on your publishing settings. So if you look at your publishing settings, right now, it's kind of saying, well, I want my Flash file, my Swift file, and I want my HTML wrapper file, for the web, right? I can also ask for other stuff as well to be published when I publish my Swift file. Okay, that's what I can allow it to do. Just gonna exit out of here. Sorry, it's just big. All right. So again, we have on the main timeline here, we have a bunch of layers, some of them that have been broken down into this folder, right? So these layers, photo 1, 2, and 3, are in this photo layer, which we're going to see in a few minutes. Okay? And when I scrub across the timeline here, I can see the pictures as they appear. It's very, very simple. Let's go back. So here's my timeline. And what I want to do is, if I want to insert an object, as an example, onto the timeline, there's different ways I can do it, right? Example, I can import to the stage, or I can import to the library, okay? If I import to the stage, right, click import, I can choose an object, like for example, I have that kind of that Coney Island background that I want to kind of include onto the stage. And if I look at my my code archive, if I have it here, I can drag and drop anything that's in here, like for example this background.jpg file. I can open it, and there it is. This is that Coney Island kind of boardwalk, if you will. That's what they used here. Let's try that again. So here it is. So here's my stage. In this particular case, the object that I've loaded in, right, which is this background, is actually the same size as my stage, 800 by 600, right? If I look at my library, it's part of my library already as well as a graphic object. It's not a symbol. It's a graphic object that's in my library, right? Now, what I want to do, again, when I'm creating this kind of the stuff for this lesson, is I want to create this as a background. So I can actually rename my my layer as the background layer. I can rename it, right? And you should. Every object should have its own layer, right? Again, if I want to save this, and I'll just save it as kind of like 01, and I'll call it like a working copy. You can call it whatever you like, right? And I'm putting it in my code archive, right? Now it doesn't exist. If I actually do a command, if I go back to properties, right? And if you notice, there's a couple things. My target is Flash Player 11.4, right? And my script is ActionScript 3. I can change this to the older versions of the ActionScript, but I recommend you don't. I think you should keep it at ActionScript 3. That's the most modern version. For Flash Player, sometimes, depending on where you work, they might say, you know what, our users on our Windows XP machines don't have ActionScript, Flash Player 11.4. They only have Flash Player 10. So you may have to reposition your movie for Flash Player 10 or 10.3. In this particular case, that's the lowest one we can go for 10.x, right? Yours might say something different, by the way. The one on your machine in front of you may say Flash Player 11.2, right? Depending on when it was last updated, your version of Flash, right? Under publishing settings, like I said, right now we're producing an HTML wrapper, right, as well as a Swift file, right? So I press OK. If I can just move that up a little bit. And if I, right here, from here, if I press Control or Command Enter or Return, I create my Swift file, and it doesn't really do anything. It's just a background of a picture. That's all it is, right? But I still produce a number of kilobytes for the picture itself. It's 229 kilobytes, right? If I look at my folder again, and I go back in here, I've got 01 working copy, dash working copy, the Swift file, right? I don't have my HTML document because I really didn't do anything with it right now. It will. I can export to HTML as well. One of the questions I always get with Flash is, hey, Flash is dead, right? So why would I use it in my HTML? But it's not really dead, right? Like we said. If, for example, if I want to export this, there's another module you can get, and I recommend you download this. It's free from Adobe. It's called Toolkit for Create.js. You have to actually import it and install it into your Flash for it to work. I've already done it in mine, right? So if I publish with Create.js, right, it's actually now, here's what my Flash movie looks like on the web. And when I do this, if I go back into my Finder window and I look at my my code archive, I have a working copy HTML. I also have a JavaScript file, right, that basically it kind of defines what my HTML document's going to do, right? Plus a lot of other stuff here. It actually puts everything into my images in the background and all kinds of other stuff. It actually converts my movie into an HTML compatible movie, right? Which is really, really cool. So I can do animation with it as well using my Create.js. Let's just try that really quickly. So following the lesson, if I import the rest of my JPEGs and I import them to Stage, and let's say, for example, I have all those other objects. Here's photo 1, 2, 3, 4, and I highlight them all and press OK or Open, right? All of them are positioned, right? Actually, let's go to the timeline. I got the first one. If I go to my library, they're all here, right? So photo 1, okay, and here's photo 2, here's photo 3, and here's photo 4. I've got all these photos that I've kind of got from my library, right? Let's just erase them. So my first photo is here in this particular timeline, but I've got two images. I've got my stage, right, which is this boardwalk looking thing, and I've got this photo here, which is another object. What I can do is I can kind of right click, and I can say distribute to layers. If I say distribute to layers, it's going to create another layer. Oh, it actually has all of them here. That's not interesting. So it actually did what I asked it to do. Let's try that again. So if I go to my photo layer, and just kill this again, just a moment. There we go. Oops. Here's my background. Let's try that again. So here's my photo on my thing. I'm going to right click, and I go distribute to layers. Yeah, it was there. It'll actually put both my images in different places, and if I kind of take away this image, my photo is actually on the lower layer, and that's why I can't see it. If I want to see my photo, I got to move it up one. Right now, my photo is layered because remember it's done in layer order, right? So I can change this to, I don't know what it's, some kind of pinwheel or whatever, right? I can name it whatever I want. I can keep it as photo 1, right? So here's my pinwheel, and they're on different layers, right? Now I want to lock my background layer so nothing happens to that anymore, right? So when I drag and drop these other photos, right, they're not going to interfere with my background, right? I could do it different ways. Before I drag and drop it onto the screen, I can create it as a layer. Okay, so again, here's my pinwheel or whatever this is, photo 1, right? I can lock this one, and I can create a new layer on top of that one, right? And I can drag and drop photo number 2 onto it, right, as an example, right? And then from here, I can use my transform tools to rotate photo 2 in a different way, right? If I want to. Now both of them are going to appear because this is on the same frame. This happens instantaneously. And what I want to do on layer number on this new one, which is, let's just call this photo 2, just because I can't figure out what it is that I'm looking at. Some other thing from Coney Island, right? I want it to appear later on. So first, the pinwheel and the background come in, and then what I want to do is I want to kind of go to, let's say, frame 12 for both of them, and I want to insert frames, right? So for these 12 frames, nothing changes, right? Then on frame 13, right? So I go to frame 13, look at my photo layer. I've locked my other layers, and I drag and drop this layer, this other picture in there. So I drag and drop this picture, photo 2, right? On my, I actually got to create a frame. Hold on a second, insert frame, and I drag and drop this this photo 2 onto my stage. Now, if you notice, I have a problem because I didn't insert another frame for this one or for this one. My stage goes missing, goes whoop, and it goes away. By the way, I got to change my stage properties just 1 second to 800 by 600 because it's not 800 by 600 right now. 800, 600. Right, and go back. There it is. And I can also notice that it's a little bit bigger. I want to extend my layer here as well, so I insert frame. Right. So now both of my frames are there. I'm only dealing with photo number 2, right? And I want to kind of rotate it in an interesting way when it comes to number 12, right? So on the 12th frame, it comes in and rotates in a rotated fashion. To test my movie, Control or Command and return or enter, right? Now, if it happens right away, as an example, let's go back and scrub it. So it should be like this. If you notice, they're all there. Well, what I want to do is I don't want it to be all there. I just want it to come in on frame number 12, right? So what I need to do is kill all these frames in between, right? And create a keyframe, insert keyframe right there, right? So there's my keyframe. And from here to here, right, I want to remove frames, right? I can also drag my keyframe right to this area here. So I can copy my keyframe, right? I'll cut my frames and insert them wherever I want, like so frame number 12. So paste. So now I have what I want. Boom, and then boom. So empty keyframes, and then it comes in there, right? I'm not making any changes to these two layers, the pinwheel in the background, just photo number 2. So now when I animate it, right, boom, it kind of goes, and then it flashes back. Why is it doing that? Because it's happening in like half a second, right? Because remember, I have 24 frames a second, and on frame 12, this thing comes in. So I got to extend these frames a little bit more. So let's say by frame 24, right? So I go to here, and I want to kind of extend these frames now to frame 24, right? So I kind of insert frames. So here we are. So it kind of goes from frame 1, hits frame 12, lasts till about frame 24, and then disappears. Right? A little bit different. Okay, so there's my movie. Now, I want to keep adding additional layers. So I lock this one, right? I lock this layer, and I add a new layer. So here's photo 3. Here it is, right? Photo 3, what I want to do is create a keyframe, insert a keyframe in that particular position, right? So on the 24th frame, I want to add in another photo inside photo 3. So I drag and drop. There it is. I've already got the transformation tool selected, but what I want to try and do is probably transform it right from here. So I can kind of rotate it a little bit more. Part of it's going to be outside of the stage. You remember, the user will never see anything that goes outside of the stage onto the pasteboard. He only sees stuff that's in the stage boundaries. Anything outside of the stage, unseen. Okay? So that's what I've done here. Let's check. We also want to extend this another 12 frames. So from 24, we'll go to 36. And we'll add in a bunch of these frames. Just a bunch of them. We'll drag this whole area and insert frames. Here we go. And now what we have is, if I scrub the timeline, boom, it pops in, boom, it pops in, and then we go to the next one, right? So let's take a look at that. 1, 2, right? Really, really quickly. We got one more we're going to add in now, and we're going to add into another layer. So we go into new layer, and it appeared here. You can always drag the layer where you want it though, so let's just drag it up. And we'll call this photo 4 really quickly, right? We're going to insert a keyframe right into this area. Remember, a keyframe, what it does is it makes note of any changes that happen to a particular picture on a specific layer. That's what it does. So I go to photo number 4, drag and drop it in. I use a selector tool to position it properly over the other one, just to keep it the same. And then I use the transform tool to rotate it as I come close. There we go. So now part of it's going to be out. Okay, so we've got a little animation. Let's just extend it another 12 frames to 48. So now we have a full 2 seconds, all the way to 48. I should just go to there, 48. And we will insert frames. And then it's going to loop. So it's going to go like this, 1, 2, 3, and then back to 1 again. It's going to go right back to 1. Okay. So here's, if I want to look at the actual frame that I'm targeting, it actually says, it'll say frame 47 or frame 48. This is frame 48 we're at right now with playhead, right? And I can keep scrumming back, and on the bottom here, if I can actually move this without my menu popping up like that, on the bottom, if you notice, there's the frame number is right here. That's the current frame. This is the current frames per second down here on the menu. All right, let's play the movie. 1, 2, 3. That's what happens with the movie. So it kind of pops up, almost like a little ad. Hey, these are all the pictures you see on Coney Island. But remember, you told me it was useless. Flash is useless, you said, because it's gone. There's no more Swift files. Mobile doesn't support it. But again, I can go through, I can go right here to Create.js, and I can publish it with Create.js, and now it works just fine, and with no Swift file. Okay, this is right in the web. Okay, and if you notice, if I want to pull the JavaScript, right? It did give me some warnings here, right? Because create.js requires certain things to happen in a certain way, right? But if I want to pull up the JavaScript here, so here I am in my Finder window, and I go to my HTML document here. I want to open with Dreamweaver. So Dreamweaver is going to open in a second. Here's my HTML document that I'm loading. And actually what it does is create.js takes my pictures. It loads in, first of all these libraries, right? Like we talked about in the first half. And then it takes my pictures and exports them as images, right? And there's no Swift file whatsoever. So as you can see, Flash is not just usable with Swift files. You can use it without it. You can export it as JavaScript. And this is why it's important in first half, the other course that we're doing, that we learn how to manipulate JavaScript well so we can take this information and modify it as we need. Okay, so back to this. So we kind of did this. And what I recommend to you is, like I said, you read some of the stuff that I have. Again, I've given if you can't remember what the terms are, you can watch the video. And I've also labeled everything here just as it is labeled in the book, Flash CS6 Classroom in a Book, right? So I'm just going to skip through stuff that we've already talked about. We've talked about working with the library panel as well, and how to drag and drop stuff from the library panel onto the stage. I recommend you follow some of these examples on your own and try it again. Understanding the timeline and how the playhead works, how to insert frames. These are all key kind of activities you need to do with Flash, right? Understanding different layers and so on, naming the layers, right? One thing we didn't do is we didn't really talk about, we talked about keyframes, but there's different kinds of keyframes. There's ones that are an empty keyframe, right, where something doesn't change. And there's also a filled-in keyframe, ones where you have a change in either your rotation, your position, your skewing, your color. Something changes on the keyframe for the object that you're changing, right, in that particular layer, right? And when the difference is on the timeline, an empty keyframe's got an empty circle here, and then the filled-in keyframe has a solid circle. So that's one way you can know these things. These things, when you recognize the timeline and understand the timeline, using the UI is very important. So I would recommend, after we're done, again, doing this stuff, play with Flash as much as you can, make some mistakes, and that way when we get together next time, when we do more animation, you've already done some of this already. Okay. I'm just going to skip ahead, which we did a lot of these keyframes. We're entering frames here and organizing things in layers. Layer folders are really cool too. Like for example, we had layer 1, 2, 3 of these photos. Well, what you can do is, from an organizational perspective, and again, you know, when I want to look at, I'm just going to close Dreamweaver here. If I go back to Flash, if I look at these layers, there's pinwheel, photo 1, 2, 3, 4. What I can do, right, is I can insert a layer folder. Right, so here's my folder, and maybe I want to call this photos, right? And what I can do is I can try to drag my photo underneath my layer, right? So I can organize my timeline, let's say with photos and background. Now, if you notice, when I've done that, I've actually hidden the timeline from my other objects. This is good and bad, right? It's a good thing because you don't care about anything that's in the photos, right? It's a bad thing because I don't know what's happening in that particular timeline unless I open up my folder. So it's a pretty good way of organizing. Just be careful. If you see a folder, open it up if you want to see the timeline for those particular objects that are inside of it. Right, so here it is. Again, I want to see the timeline. I can do it. I can still see, if I scrub the playhead, even with my folder closed, I still see changes in the timeline. I just don't see it here. It's inside this folder. Okay, so be cognizant of that. Keep that in mind. All right. There's different ways of viewing the folder, and we talked about the Properties Inspector a lot, kind of in passing. What the Properties Inspector allows us to do again, going back to Flash, this properties inspector allows us to not only, if I select a particular object, so let's go back to Pinwheel, and I unlock it. Let's say I unlock all these objects, right? If I select Pinwheel, so right now, even though these other objects are on top of it, I can kind of make them invisible. Here I've selected Pinwheel and using the selection tool. Here's the selection tool, right? And by the way, if you hover over any of these tools, it'll give you the name of the tools right here, just by hovering over them, right? So with this little menu, if I click onto it, it'll tell me two things. It'll tell me the position and the size. That's what it tells me right now. And it also tells me what kind of object it is. Right now, if you notice this pinwheel or whatever this thing is, this object is a bitmap, right? That's what it is, right? So if I click on the background, now I'm going to click on the background, I'll unlock it. It'll say it's a bitmap, and it'll give me its size and position, right? So the properties inspector here is something we've kind of been using here, right? But I haven't really named it as a properties inspector. It's definitely the properties panel, and by the way, properties, depending on what Adobe product you use, there's always properties in every single Adobe product, right? Let's go back. Okay, we've also used the transform tool, and there's ways of doing numeric transforms. I've been doing things on a free transform, right? But if I go back, if I want to go to, let's show some of these objects. Like for example, let's say I think this object here, photo number 4, right, it's transformed too far. It's rotated too much, right? I can go to the transform tab, right, and I can rotate it less. I can say, well, I don't want a rotation of 25, right? I want a rotation of 20. And then it'll rotate exactly a numeric rotation as opposed to a free rotation like I was doing, right? So you can do things like that as well. I can also skew the object if I want right here. If I can click skew, and let's say I want to skew the object to 25 degrees, right? So I can make it kind of skewed if I really want to. I don't know why I would want to, but I could do that. And so this transform tab is also very useful for doing numeric transforms as opposed to free transforms the way I was doing it. Okay. And the tools panel that I was using, right? I was using the tools panel to select different tools and put different objects on the screen as according to the tool I was selecting. If I want to put text on the screen, I can do the same thing. I can select the text tool and drag and drop the text onto the screen. It's important to know how to do that. So let's try that. So now at frame 48, right, I want to create a new layer. So I'm going to just skip up here and increase the amount of my layer, or my timeline, the real estate here. And I want to kind of add in a new layer on top of my photo layer, right? So here it is, right? So here I'm at the top of my photo layer. I'm going to add a new layer. I'm going to call this text, right? And I don't want my text appearing until frame 48. So this is where I want to actually insert my keyframe. So here it is, my keyframe's inserted. And now what I can do in frame 48, I can lock the other layers, right? And I can kind of put some text in here. Welcome to my crazy island, right? Because I feel it's crazy, right? Now if you notice, welcome to my crazy island kind of fades off in the background because, you know, I don't have any background to this text at all. It's just text, right? If I go back to the example, if you notice, right, I can change what it says on my text, but at the end of the day, unless my text is outside of my picture and it's big enough, you won't be able to see it. Like right now, my text is black, so it's kind of faded, or white, and it's faded away here. So if I change my properties for my text, I can do two things. First of all, to notice, I'm using classic text. Okay, and this, if you hover over it, it says text engine. Why? Because for programming purposes, there's two types of text. There's classic text and there's TLF text. Two types of text. TLF text allows us more control. It allows us to change the properties and stuff programmatically a lot more. In this particular case, we don't need anything but classic text, so it's okay, right? It also changes the type of family of text, how big the text is. If I want to type in, for example, make my text bigger, 60 as an example, and I want to change the size of where my text appears, and let's say instead of black, or white, I want to make it like the example is yellow, and I want to make it bold or bigger. Right now it's italic. I can say bold italic, right? Welcome to my crazy island, and I can make it to kind of put it on my right here, right? So I can fit in because I want my text to fit on my stage, and only on my stage. It's kind of weird. A little bigger. There we go. Welcome to my crazy island. And there, now you can kind of see all my text, but it's going to appear on frame 48. So here it's nothing here. Well, boom, it appears to my crazy island, right? And I can add in additional frames to keep that text there without it flashing away. So maybe another 12 or 24 frames. So I'm just going to pick a random amount. Let's say that many more frames, and I can insert frames. So my text is actually going to stay there for that many more frames, right? And so is everything else. Boom, and it goes, and then it'll finally loop. Let's try that. And then boom, there it becomes, and then it goes away. Okay. Again, all we're doing, the lesson here is we can add stuff in or modify things every single frame on the timeline. That's a really important lesson that we're having here. Okay. And we've already previewed the movie by pressing Control or Command and Enter, right? And we can save the movie if you want to. I recommend this, actually. It's a really good best practice. Clicking autosave on your document settings. So if I go back to my Flash, I click on my document itself. It's 800 by 600. If I click on this little wrench here, right? This is the document settings, and I can actually click on autosave every 10 minutes or whatever. Really important because your computer, let's face it, especially the school computer in front of you, and if you're using this for Flash, you don't want you to do your stuff and all of a sudden your Flash crashes. That would be bad, right? You spend lots of time doing it and your Flash crashes, really ultra bad. So make sure you put your autosave on regularly. You have to tell it where to go. You just tell it where to save. So it'll save automatically in the folder that you're saving your files. Okay. All right. So that's it for lesson 1. Let's just kill this and kill this, and let's go on to the next PowerPoint presentation. But before I do that, of course, we're going to stop the movie.